Welcome to Transqat. I'm Claire McCarthy. My guest this episode is my good friend Lynn. We agreed that we wanted something frank and insightful, but not disruptive to her daughter, and consequently, we've taken some steps to be respectful. For one thing, we chose not to use Lynn's last name. She's very aware that her daughter's story belongs exclusively to her daughter. We thought at first maybe we'd use a pseudonym, but we discarded that idea and in its place decided just to use she, her pronouns. Lynn's experiences intersect with her daughter's, but they don't supersede them. Lynn is one of the people I trust most in this world, someone with whom I can confide anything. If you have a friend with whom you can discuss dilation comfortably, you're pretty darn lucky. When I was considering options for surgery, it was Lynn who advised me and directed me, and she was at my side when I was released from the hospital. If you're a relative or a friend of a transgender person, you can learn a lot from Lynn about what support really means. I am so happy to welcome to the show my friend Lynn. Welcome to Transqat.
Thank you.
So I was driving over here, and on NPR, I heard that today is Happiness Happens Day. And after I finished mocking in my head, I started thinking about the fact that my relationship to happiness really comes out of being trans in a world that, well, let's say, doesn't necessarily appreciate that all the time. And that we like to think we make decisions based on reason, but really it comes down to happiness. You know, really important questions like, are you happy? Do you deserve to be happy? What would happiness look like or feel like in this particular situation? And I know I'm have a different relationship since I've come out, but for half a century, I was colored by this wrong lens in terms of my relationship to happiness. What is happiness to you? What's your relationship with happiness?
Yeah, it's definitely complicated because I find myself being an optimist for some unknown reason, but then I also have depression and anxiety. So those two butt their heads constantly. Yeah. So it's just a matter of who is winning that day.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. Because I can find myself happy and hopeful, and then depression happens.
Absolutely. Tell me how I should address you.
Yes. After months, perhaps years, thinking about it, I'm pretty sure I'm cis. I don't necessarily express my gender femininely all the time. Mm-hmm. That is separate, and my gender expression is not very girly.
Yeah, right,
but
right.
I've decided that I think I'm okay with being a woman, and I think I'm okay with that. As for the other part, I don't know. I think I'm somewhere not straight. I don't know what that is, and I've put some thought into it, but it just hurts my brain. So, but I'm in a straight relationship, so I guess for the moment I am mostly.
So then what is it that gives you particular insight into transgender issues? Because that's what I've invited you here to talk about. So how do you come to have experience with that? I've
been adjacent to the LGB part of the community for decades. I always had friends who were gays and lesbians. Never knew any trans people in person, or that I knew about. Maybe I'd come across someone, but I didn't know. Then, 6 years ago, my firstborn child came out as a trans girl, and that was my first introduction to the trans world.
So you were just dropped in the deep end, and
yes, I did not know anyone. I felt very isolated and alone because I didn't know what to do. I knew perfectly well what to do if I had a gay child. That seemed easy. In my head, I didn't say it out loud. In my head, I'm thinking, can't you just be gay? Yep. Yes, I did have that moment of this is a bad thing to say out loud. Let's filter that and get that inside voice.
Inside voice, yes. Right. So this was 6 years ago, you said?
6 years ago, so 2016, is that what year it is?
Yes.
Yes.
I was told I wouldn't have to do math, that I could just come here and talk to
Okay,
you,
all right,
and we wouldn't.
all right.
So no math. What did that feel like? Did she come to you with a sense of, hey, Mom, I've figured out something really cool about myself and I want to share it with you? Or was it more, I'm afraid to say this? Yeah.
Yes, yeah. It was definitely the latter. And actually, I could tell probably a few weeks that something was bothering her. I could tell because we had just the month before gone on a trip to another state to see my family, and I could tell, she was thinking and very in her head, and something was on her mind. I think I had, like, oh, everything's okay. Didn't really get much of an answer.
From a teenager? That's
Right, I know,
surprising.
Yeah. And then finally, like, oh, Mom, can we talk?
And were you the first person she came out to?
I believe I was the first person in person. She did have a group of online friends, and I believe there was one person she told online, but perhaps that person encouraged her, to come out to me. And actually, she didn't speak it; she had to write it down. She was too afraid to say the words.
Sure. But that speaks so
Yes.
well of you, that she's feeling anxious to the point of, I can't even say these words out loud, but you're the one she picked to trust. That's marvelous.
Yeah, what I wanted to do as a mother was to be there for my kids. My own mother, she was there as much as she could. She did work full time. I was a latchkey kid, got the key around my neck and let myself in as a 6-year-old,
Make your PB&J and
Right.
sit in front of the TV.
Exactly. Typical Gen X existence. Yeah, so I definitely wanted to have that same type of relationship with my kids and just be there when they needed me. And plus that's kind of what I signed up for when I had kids. To me, that's being a parent. So I was too afraid. I think because she's the type who researches a lot, I'm sure she had read all the stories about people coming out and being rejected and being kicked out of the house,
Sure.
disowned, all the awful stories we hear about so much.
One of the trade-offs, I suppose, of, I came up in the 70s and 80s, and there was no information available. The only way you got coming out stories was if you were in a community of LGBTQ folks, and those stories were shared person to person. And so in some ways, I envy trans and just queer youth in general today, in that we have the internet, we have social media, they have access to anything they want, but there's a lot of scary stuff out there too.
Right, just thinking, young teen trying to sort through that, just to figure out, because she did when she was about 13, told me, why am I a freak, Mom? It just broke my heart. And, I didn't know where that was coming from, and, it kind of showed that she didn't understand what was going on.
That was the word
Right.
she chose to apply.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so it was just...
Now, if she wasn't able to express the words out loud, I'm assuming that she didn't have a rollout plan when she came to you. And so how involved were you in rolling out the telling of people in the family and beyond?
This was before the start. It was over the summer, so it was before the start of 10th grade. And originally, she told me that she wanted to go to school as her true self starting that year. But in my head, I was thinking about all the things that we had to do to get ready to do that. And, I think I said, well, I need to talk to the school and, find a therapist to help with this, because this was something I didn't know about, and so I needed to learn more. I needed to educate myself.
Yeah.
And it just felt like that would be too soon. And actually, I think the more she thought about it, she kind of agreed because she decided she did want to grow her hair, and in her words, she wanted to look more like a girl before she told people she was a girl, which it makes sense.
Absolutely.
So that was kind of what we decided together, that we would use that year to transition and get all our ducks in the line, and then the following year she could fully be herself. So at home, she was a girl, and
anything outside of the home you put off for a year.
Yes.
to make the transition manageable for everybody.
Yes.
The more likely to get positive outcomes.
Right. And so in order to get to the point where she was comfortable being out in public, mostly I, researched what to do and support groups and any information there was for me. And I immediately found an online support group, and luckily found someone in my own state who suggested a local support group. And I was able to get in touch with the leader, and was able to get to the group right away within a short amount of time of her coming out.
So a
Yes.
multitude of voices and experiences.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
And really, that was my lifeline. Those meetings were everything. I mean, it was pre-COVID, so we met in person.
I remember those days.
Yeah, I remember that. And it was just nice to know I wasn't alone, that there were other people going through or went through the same things that I went through and felt, and they had children who went through the same things that my daughter was going through. So I learned so much. The learning curve for when your child comes out is steep.
Yeah, what you had said earlier, I think, is really true. If you had come to me and said, you're gay, I would have known what to say and what to do.
Right.
Because over the last couple of decades, the culture has absorbed those lessons, and but the information, if it doesn't get out there, even people who are loving and want to support aren't sure what to do.
Yes, yeah. And actually, my one and only exposure really was watching the interview of Barbara Walters with Jazz Jennings.
With Jazz.
This little girl. And actually that kind of prepped me for when my daughter came out, because I watched that fairly soon after it happened. I don't remember the exact year.
Because she was maybe 5 or something.
Yeah, maybe 2008, 7, somewhere.
Again, I'm not doing math. I'm
right,
sorry.
Right. So a while ago.
Okay.
I watched that interview, and just words of a child, it really struck me when she said, my brain and my heart are a girl, my body is a boy. That helped me understand, because previous to that, I know I didn't understand. I was trying to imagine, what would it feel like if I wanted to be a man? And then after hearing her, I realized, I'm thinking about this the wrong way. I need to flip it. I feel exactly how I do now. I'm a woman, but everyone around me keeps calling me he and him and a man, and I'm like, I understand now. Suddenly wanting to feel like a man, it's feeling like I've always felt, and realizing the world doesn't see me the same way myself. And so, really, Jazz helped me prepare to have a trans child, that I wasn't coming at it, all the myths and misconception and misinformation that's out there. And so at least I could somewhat understand.
A signpost, at least, something
right,
to.
Exactly. Yeah, it was one less hurdle for me once she came out. I didn't have to get rid of all that baggage that is wrong.
Right, exactly.
And so I could just jump in with, okay, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to help her.
And as you helped her roll this out, let's just start with the family, the extended family. How did that go? Did you run into any bumps?
Yes, actually with my spouse, which kind of surprised, kind of surprised because I thought I married someone who was on the same page as me. We saw eye to eye about most things. And obviously, we don't agree on everything. So,
Was this a vehement no son of mine, or was it more?
I didn't really know what was going to happen. So we went to a park and, just kind of let him know what I knew. And for him, I think it was more, I could see the denial. It was more, well, this is a phase. Our child is too young to know. It just felt like he didn't want it to be real, because I know it's a harder path. He knew that it was a harder path, and no one wants that for their child. And so even though it was heartbreaking that he was saying no, wanted our child to wait until they're 18, too young, it's just a phase. But I knew it really wasn't from a place of
Sort of determined opposition. It was more, culturally.
Right. It was just a lack of education.
So he's expressing a sense of, this is not something I'm comfortable with, and that's really common.
Yes.
Right? Is that sort of the things that I heard coming out and have heard since are, I have nothing against transgender people in general, but when a 5-year-old says, and this fear that somehow 5-year-olds are going under the knife, these ridiculous, and it's not unreasonable that it would take some time for him to dispel some of those myths.
Right. Yeah, so things were a little tense at home, to say the least. In honesty, it's probably the closest I've ever been to thinking that we might get divorced. Because I thought, if he can't get through this, if he can't get on board, then I'm siding with my child who needs help, but I need to help my child who's in crisis.
Right. You had mentioned Jazz Jennings before, and I think it was Jazz's mom who said, I would much rather have a live daughter than a dead son.
Right.
And that's one of those lines that always resonates with me, in that it's like, this is a complicated decision, and it's an issue that maybe most people don't know a lot about, but when it comes down to something as stark as that,
and that's how eventually we got through this. It was the longest few weeks of my life, but he did agree to go to see the therapist. I think, was it the 3 of us or the 2 of us? At least, I think it was the 3 of us, but at one point, just my spouse and I were in the room with the therapist, and she talked him through all his fears, all his thoughts, and just, does this make sense? Basically just talked him through what his thought process was. And, that was when I really saw that it was fear, that he was afraid for this child.
which is an expression of love.
Right, so yes, and that kind of, I think, got the ball rolling for him and gave me hope that we could do this. And that night when we got home from the therapy, that was exactly what I told him, was that we can love our daughter or we can marry our quote-unquote son. And from that moment on, the next day, he started calling her by the name that she wanted us to call her, and using she and her pronouns. We were like, my daughter and I looked at each other, it was like, he said it! Such a happy day.
Your daughter does have a sibling.
Yes.
And how did that rollout go?
Yes, I have 2 children, and the younger one so far identifies as a cishet male. He's a couple of years younger, and I did sit him down to explain, using a lot of Jazz Jennings wording, and let him know that it was really hurting his sibling to pretend to be a boy, and when we love someone, we don't want them to hurt, so we're going to help her not hurt, and by doing that, we're going to call her by another name, and she's going to grow her hair. We're going to call her she and her. And, you know, and asked him if he had any questions. And of course, like, but yeah, he did ask me, you know, in a preteen boy kind of way, like, is she going to have boobs?
Right to the heart of the matter.
Right,
That's
right.
good.
And I said, well, not right away, but eventually she will, yes. and he wanted to know, you know, will she still play video games with me? Yes, she will. She still likes video games. And he did kind of grieve in his own way for the best big brother ever. He had a little bit of cry, but to be honest, he has been the only one who has never once misgendered her or said the wrong name. Ever.
Wow.
From day one, I was amazed. Like, he would correct us, like we would slip up and, you know, say he instead of she, and he would just walk right in there, she. And so he has been the best through this all. And now
that's
it's just normal brother,
that's
sister.
the status quo shifted, and
he
there you
doesn't
are.
think about it. I don't think he's thought about it in years.
Opponents of transgender rights, and I'm thinking now particularly of a really large state in the South where everything is really large, they seem to feel that if you have a transgender kid, you did something to convert them. And I'm not openly criticizing you for only being able to convert one of your two kids, but maybe you could try harder.
Maybe. Yeah. You know, I was so prepared just in case I had a child who was gay, because my state passed marriage equality laws quite a while ago. You know, when my kids were young, they were 4 and 7, I think, at the time. And from that day, I started talking to them about, you know, love is love. You can love whoever you want, but one, you have to be an adult to get married, and you can't marry anyone in your family because, you know, my 4-year-old, of course, wanted to marry me, and I said, well, you can't marry me. And like, well, what about the cousin? No, you can't marry your cousin either. So, like, okay, you have to be an adult and no family members. It's, you know, you can just tell me, Mom, this is who I love, and that's okay, and I'm fine with that. So I wanted to let them know that, you know, down the line, if they find that maybe they're not having the usual heteronormative feelings, that I'm on board with that. But I wish gender identity had been on my radar. Just did not think to talk about that. It just wasn't something I never...
But I'm sure that on some level, you're laying the groundwork with conversations like that, where you're sending a message to them that I'm open, I'm supportive, love is love, as you say, that I'm sure that factored into your daughter's decision to come to you first.
Yeah, I certainly hope that, you know, that they knew at some level that Mom was okay with whatever I told her. So, you know, even if we didn't specifically, you know, tell them about gender identity and, you know, that there's a spectrum, and tell me.
My experience as a teacher in the last, let's just say the last decade, has been quite an education for me, in that this younger generation of queer kids knows so much more about all these different identities and labels and terms, and it kind of slapped me in the face with, you have a lot to learn. You know, I got to this point where I was comfortable enough with myself to be able to share that, but learning doesn't stop there.
Right. Yeah, there's not just the binary.
Right.
Yeah, there's just so much more.
I remember in the 90s, I picked up a copy of Kate Bornstein's Gender Outlaw, and that was the first time I had run into that idea. So I would have been in my 30s maybe, but that notion that, gender is not a binary, that A, it's this spectrum, and B, wherever you are on that is fine, and it's probably going to change over time. And I remember just having to put the book down and walk away for a little while, because it was just...
Because it's against everything we've been taught.
Yeah.
Growing up, where it's like, okay, you know, you're either A or B, either male or female. There's nothing else.
And she has such a personable tone. She's irreverent towards herself, and I find her very funny. That really got through to me, is that, you know, all of those defenses I had put up was like, well, okay, you can let some of that down. And it took me another couple decades to get there, but that notion, accepting that, was revelatory.
It is quite eye-opening. You know, once you see it, you think, well, duh. One of the, it's a TED Talk, but I watch it on YouTube. I highly recommend, the woman's name is Emily Quinn, and the title is, I think, The Way We Think About Biological Sex is Wrong. And she is an intersex woman, and she talks about all the different ways to be a person. For her, you know, she has both, you know, a vagina and testes. You know, she doesn't have a uterus, but she grew breasts, and well, she's XX, or no, XY. Right, she's the male, right.
So now math and science.
Right,
We've established that those two topics.
Right.
Got it.
I know.
So we'll definitely link to that in the show notes. I would love to have an episode of this show on intersex folks, because I there again don't know enough.
Don't know, even once I learned more about the trans community, I didn't know a lot about intersex people at all, and so that was very good. But I wanted to mention that in it, she talks about how everything in nature is a spectrum. So it makes sense, you know, that we are a spectrum. You know, we don't, I think she, you know, said we don't just either have blue eyes or brown eyes. We don't have, you know, blonde hair or black hair.
All sorts of shades.
Right, and skin color, you know, there's everything about us. There's not nose A, there's not nose B. You know, so everything about us is a spectrum. So biological sex as well
would obviously be, but we just need to dismantle the cultural expectations that it's not. And that's
generations who grew up with the science teacher who said, okay.
X or XY, yeah. Well, I'll go one better on that. I went to Catholic grade school, first through 8th grade.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm working on it. I'm getting better. Actually, I went to one Catholic grade school in grades 1 through 5, and then they went out of business. So I got shipped up to the school on the hill with the wealthy kids. But in my original school, we didn't do this anymore. We were maybe a couple of years past this, but when we went out for recess, we went back in, and there were 2 doors with stone carvings above the lintel that said girls and boys. And we were maybe the first generation that didn't respect that. You just went in the door that was close. Right, exactly. But the gender binary was literally carved in stone in my childhood. And it's hard to argue with that, but it says right there.
Yeah.
So let me just bring us back to your daughter. So you roll it out to the family, the extended family, and then the time comes when we're going to do this school year. And you said this was junior year or senior year?
Because sophomore year, she grew her hair out, and anyone that came to our home, I made sure to tell, you know, anyone who was close to us. So at home, she was fully, you know, her authentic self, but at school, she was still going by her dead name and he, him, which was heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I kind of tried to push her to come out earlier because I saw the toll that it was taking on her to go to school, and to see her like that.
There's a rational perspective of someone who's not involved emotionally with a trans person who could look at that and say, well, it's not like I told you no forever. I said a year, you can hold on for a year.
Right.
But the toll that takes.
I could just, it was like a literal weight on her. She never looked up from the floor. Her shoulders were hunched over. It was heartbreaking to see, and we talked about it, but her anxiety was such where she just wasn't ready, and I knew that she wanted to, but she was just so scared. And I think that having that original in her head, okay, starting junior year, so I think she was preparing herself for that and not anything sooner. So even though it was so hard for me, and anytime we went out of town, I said, well, you could wear, your girl clothes, and no one we know would see you, because that was her fear.
So that someone would, before she was ready to make the announcement.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so all along, I had been talking with the school psychologist, who brought in the school principal, and so the three of us had several meetings all throughout 10th grade in preparation. And to say they were affirming and supportive is to understate it, because they were just above and beyond. Like, I couldn't imagine what more they could do. Because in that time period that I told them, they brought in an organization to train their staff, and they had a speaker come in and started a club, a GSA, and they made themselves ready about bathrooms, and they were okay with any bathroom, whatever my daughter was comfortable with, because for quite a while I found out that she was no longer using the restroom at school, which is very, very common with trans youth.
Yes.
They just hold it all day, which causes health problems. So it's not unusual for trans youth just to okay, I'm not going to use either bathroom, I'm not going to use anything. I'm just going to wait till I get home, where it's safe. I won't get beat up or yelled at for choosing one or the other, or making a long trek to the nurse's bathroom.
And so instead of focusing on whatever class you're in, instead of sitting there taking notes in history class, you're sitting there thinking, can I continue to hold this in?
Yeah, and they often go to the extent of not drinking enough water. Hydrate themselves in order so they don't have to go to the bathroom all day, and they can wait till they get home. So that is yet another thing that could cause medical problems by being dehydrated.
I happen to be familiar with the school that your daughter went to, and I know that the guy who was principal at the time was outstanding at that sort of thing. He was able, because you going to the principal and saying, here's an issue we need to deal with my kid, is kind of linear. From his desk, he has all of these constituencies that he has to bring in on that to buy into this, including, parents, the student body, the administration, the people in the community who are not parents but seem to feel entitled to offer suggestions, and on all the different staff, from guidance, which is also excellent at this school.
Yes,
the guidance department is ridiculously and the nurse, and right on down the line. And you were fortunate enough to have somebody who not only could do that, but did it with a degree of joy, a degree of, this is something I want to do and I want to provide for you.
Yes.
What do administrators who maybe aren't that guy need to know? Where should they go for support?
Really, whether or not they have a known trans student in their school, which they probably had one who is undercover.
Right, yeah, living stealth.
Hasn't come out. That they need to implement policies right away anyway, come up with a plan for bathroom usage. Maybe have more ones that are neutral.
Single stall, or whatever you want to call it. Sure.
Handicap stall that would be
Unisex, yeah.
Yes, unisex.
Mm-hmm. You said this guy brought in trainers for his staff.
Yes, yes, have local resources on hand, and even before anyone comes out, you can train your staff in what to do when a student in your classroom says, no, I want to use these pronouns and use this name, because they may or may not be out at home. It's often the case, because I know the principal asked me about that, because he said he was more familiar with when the parents don't know, and having to be careful about not hiding the student, with the parent.
So there's a, how to prepare the school, how to prepare the staff, but there's also a need to pay attention to the specific needs of that kid, as opposed to, okay, well, we've got our blanket policy in place. That's my work here is done.
Right, yeah. And so when, because it's not an if, it's a when, you find out that you have a trans student in your school, definitely speak with them about their comfort level, what their wishes would be, to how to handle it in the school. Because we were given the option, like, okay, does she want to make the announcement in her classroom? How do you want to handle coming out? Do you want to do it all at once? I heard about some students doing it in assembly. They come out to the, I know.
Oh, such bravery.
I know.
Oh,
I know one young trans girl who came out to everyone in 7th grade, like at an assembly, just stood up and talked to everyone about it.
Oh,
wow, that is bravery.
That is awesome. Yeah. Just awesome.
Yeah, but if your child is not like that, which mine is not,
right.
Did not want to make a big deal or a big announcement, and so just wanted the teachers to, call her she and her, and by her name, anyone, or mention it to students who were incorrect, the wording. But yeah, definitely plan with how they, with the student, how they want to come out, and they can change the name on the record so that when it's on the teacher's enrollment, who's in the class, the name is right there, and so that way if there's a substitute, because I do hear a lot of times where the teacher may know, but if they have a substitute, the substitute may see the old name and use the old name, not meaning to, not knowing any better. So that way if it's on the class.
The official roster.
Right. And if the school system tells you can't do that unless it's legal, tell them they're wrong. Because there are laws everywhere saying that you can, in fact, change it. It wouldn't be records that went off to colleges or any diploma.
One of the laws, we were talking about the Texas law that was attacks parents for helping their kids get affirming care. There are a number of types of laws that are sweeping through those states, and one of them that just had me shaking my head in disbelief provides legal protection for teachers who choose not to respect your chosen pronoun. And these other waves of anti-trans legislation about the affirming care for anybody under 18 and trans athletes and bathrooms and all this stuff. And on and on and on. It's ridiculous, but that one just struck me as what.
Right.
You're enabling bigots. Why would you do that?
I know. Yeah, I mean, because if your student is named Nicole, but she says, "Oh, I go by Nikki," are you gonna say, "No, you absolutely cannot go by Nikki. I'm gonna call you Nicole"? Like, this is what they sound like. No, I don't believe you.
It's a phase. You're just trying to be trendy, because you know how trendy we trans people are.
Right. Yeah, because everyone wants to be trendy.
Well, one of the things you were just saying, though, about your daughter is something I recently sort of had in the fore of my mind, because on my blog I was doing a series of reviews of children's books that are trans friendly.
Yes.
again, because none of these resources were there when I was a kid, and so I adore them. But one of the patterns that I was noticing is that all of these little kids were able to verbalize, not just convince their parents that they were sincere, but they were able to verbalize maybe at a level that was not developmentally appropriate for the kid in the story. And I was wondering if you would speak to the idea that, of what you do when your kid's not necessarily able to make a convincing rhetorical argument to you.
Well, start by not doing what I did. Here I thought, okay, we're not going to use cutesy nicknames for our genitals. As my children were growing and asking questions, and in the bathtub, things are visible. And so I know at some point I told them, boys have a penis and girls have a vagina. And my daughter is a rule follower. And so I'm sure she heard that and said, well, Mom says because I have a penis, I must be a boy. So for us, I think that probably delayed things. So instead, I would definitely talk about most girls have a vagina, but some girls have a penis. Or they might have something in between that's not quite either. And, some boys have a penis, but some boys have a vagina, same way. And just talk about the different ways to be, because you are not going to make your child trans by talking about this. I repeat, you will not be making your child trans.
I'm writing this down, Lynn.
I'm talking about it. There is absolutely no way. As I like to, many in the gay community says, I read heterosexual stories all growing up, and I still came out gay. It's the same way. Either you are or you're not. You may discover it at different times in your life, but it doesn't mean that it's invalid, no matter when it means. So yeah, definitely from a young age, if you're able to do that, talk openly about all the different ways that you can be. The different gender expressions and gender identity and sexuality. And no, we're not sexualizing children.
Right.
It's who you have a crush on. Do you like Sally or Bobby? Or Max?
I think we all love Max.
Yes.
Yeah, and the fact that these resources now exist at all reading levels means that you could, during Pride Month, you could at bedtime stories, you could read something that just,
My absolute favorite is called Red, a Crayon Story. I absolutely adore it because it's a story about crayons.
Who doesn't love crayon stories?
Right. And crayons are making their pictures and just loving life. But this one crayon has a wrapper that is blue, but inside they're red. They try to make the sky because they think, the sky is blue. But they try and it doesn't come out right. It just, they feel like they're a failure because they can't make the sky the right color. They try to make the ocean. Again, they feel like they fail because it comes out red, and they just don't understand why everything is not. Eventually they discover it's because the outside wrapper is the wrong color.
Is not representing who they are. And I think that speaks to, well, it's probably human nature, but the nature of kids is when they feel that conflict, they're going to go with, I'm wrong.
Right.
They're not. Right. They're not going to go with, wow, society really needs to rethink the idea of putting crayons in wrappers, but they're going to say, no, there's something wrong with me. There's something to be ashamed of. I'm going to hide that.
Right. Yeah, because the world around me is telling me I'm doing it wrong. So definitely talk with your children about all these ways of being, and so at least it's there as a nugget. Maybe they don't have feelings one way or the other. Young children don't, there's different developmental phases, so there are actually quite a few in the 3 to 5 range, because that's when developmentally gender identity is formed, and that's a milestone. You know, because we think nothing of a cis girl saying, I'm a girl, and we say, yes, good,
Yeah.
yes, you are a girl, and we don't think anything of it. But someone who was assigned male at birth, who says, I'm a girl, we said, no, you got it wrong. You know, you're a boy. And if you do have a child who is able to vocalize it at a young age, definitely talk more about, or leave it open, have discussions about, you know, different ways you can feel, and that it's okay if, you know, maybe your outside body isn't mentioned, but just them wear what they want to wear, have their hair how they want to have their hair, because nothing medically done there's no permanent.
No, right. And
Nothing permanent.
I had a conversation this weekend with Tony Ferriolo, and he was talking about that puberty blockers are immediately reversible once you stop taking them. So if you decide that's the route you're going for your child, and 2 years down the road, the child says, I changed my mind. I think I was wrong about that.
Right.
No harm, no foul. You just stop the puberty blockers.
Right. And which I bring up that they've been using puberty blockers on cis girls who experience precocious puberty, 5 or 6 years old. You know, they're starting puberty much too young. And so they are given these same exact puberty blockers so that they can develop as the children are supposed to and wait until a more, you know, in the normal range of puberty. They've been used decades longer than for the trans community, but of course, as soon as the trans community say, hey, this would be helpful for us, they're not safe.
You're encouraging them. You're converting them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Really, we're giving them more time to make sure feels right, you know, because there is such thing as gender euphoria. When things feel good, they feel right.
I'm assuming that you saw changes in your daughter's approach to herself after coming out.
Oh yes, yeah. Even in those early weeks of her telling me, because I had asked her, like, okay, so what do you want to change first? And she said she wanted to shave her legs and she wanted to wear leggings. So I'm like, I can do those things. So I went out and bought her some leggings to wear.
There you go.
And I bought her own razor, and I taught her how to shave her legs. And she put on those leggings, and she flitted. She, like, nearly around the house, those leggings. I had bought her a few other outfits as well, and, you know, she was shy to show me. She still had her short hair, hadn't grown up yet. I asked her, you know, would you please show me your favorite outfit? And she said yes. And so when she was ready, I knocked and opened her bedroom door, and she had her favorite, and her face just glowed. And that was the happiest I had seen her in probably a decade. And it was then I first saw my daughter. You know, it still brings me emotional. Because, you know, when she first told me, I, to be honest, still saw her as my son. Short hair, and I looked at her, and I could see my daughter on what I call her boy mask. That I am like, oh, there she is. You know, and just like the movie Hook, I love that movie, but when the Lost Boys squish Robin Williams, and they say, there you are, Peter. And it just reminded me of that. It's like, oh, there you are, my daughter. You were hiding. You were hiding under that boy mask. Yeah. And now I see you. And from that moment on, each step we took toward transition, she became happier and happier and just lighter on her feet, head up. She didn't look at the floor, her shoulders back more. Mm-hmm. And I could see, you know, this is who she is. It's not a phase. It's truly who she is.
And as a parent who loves her kids and wants the best for them, that's a much better way for your kid to go through life. Shoulders back, eyes up, One more thing I wanted to talk about before we wrap up is that you were spectacularly supportive for your daughter. I mean, most trans kids could only wish to have someone like that in their lives, and I admire you for it. I admire you for that and the way you stood up for your daughter and helped take the lead. But you took it a step further. You did everything you could to help your daughter transition toward a healthier, happier person. But then you turned that around and made that experience available to other parents and other kids through online support groups. And talk to me a little bit about that.
Yes, because as I said, when she first came out, I knew nothing, and I was just desperate for any help. I felt adrift, and so alone. And I will never forget that feeling. So I know so many parents are going through that same thing. That, and especially in areas where they are making these laws, you can feel so alone and that everyone is against you. And I want to help those parents as much as I can. I want to pass along, pay it forward to all the new parents who are going through this. And on Facebook, I have become a co-admin for a couple of parent groups. They are secret and private, so you have to be invited by them.
And how would a parent go about finding that in need? Do they?
Yeah, there are some that are searchable, and there's a large one called Parents of Transgender Children, and that's kind of the catch-all. And so once you land there, you can find other groups, and one of the ones I am an admin for is for parents who have daughters who are assigned male at birth, but identify as daughters. And so I help the parents and share my story, and wherever they are, whether their kid has been out for 10 years or 10 days, I try to help them along the way and help them feel not so overwhelmed and afraid, and try to give them hope. I will say it's not a straight path. It's not an easy path. There are ups and downs. There could be 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So it's not easy, but the main thing is just to love your child and follow their lead and make sure that you talk to them about what they envision, because maybe they don't want everything. Maybe they don't want the surgery. Groups, we can help them through and find resources in their own area, or just help them through a crisis moment, or how do I tell my family, or my family is very religious. What do I do, and do I make the hard choice to cut them off? Because so many families have to say, no more, Grandma, you're not gendering my child correctly.
Not an easy choice, but what is best for my child in this circumstance?
Right. Because so often it is life or death. Because I also run across parents like, oh, Johnny tells me it's okay to call him she every now and then. He knows I love him, but really, Johnny doesn't want to be disowned and wants to keep your love. Doesn't want to be kicked out of the house. So they might have that hurt in their heart and won't speak up. So practice. Pronouns, practice the right name.
Practice and reach out for the support that you need.
Yes.
That you do that sort of support work is one of the many reasons why I love you, my friend.
Well, even though I've been on this journey for 6 years and I learned so much, I never stop learning. That's just one thing I want to never stop doing is always learn. And so there are things that I get wrong, and when I find out that I'm wrong, then I correct them. And then, there's the mom part of me who, because I want to help other people, I want to share our story. But then I realize that it's not all my story. It's my story. So my current struggle is finding that boundary between what is mine to tell and what is only hers to tell. Because I do worry that I'm overstepping, that I'm not being respectful. But as the case with Jazz Jennings, which isn't her real name, getting the stories out there helps people. And me hearing little girl Jazz saying that she's a girl in her heart and her brain, and just as a boy body, that helped make the connection for me. So I'm hoping that my words, our story, will help someone else.
Very grateful to Lynn for her time and her open heart. I sincerely hope, as she does, that her story might help others better understand this issue. Coming up on Transqat, we have an interview with a doctor leading the local effort to stem the current monkeypox outbreak. Get the facts, ignore the misinformation. We also have the first in a series of conversations with clergy on how they approach LGBTQ people in their congregations. I'm Claire McCarthy. Thanks for listening. Talk with you soon.
This is Sadie McCarthy. I'm Claire's niece. Transqat is a production of Transqat Enterprises, LLC. Copyright 2022, all rights reserved. Join us on the web at transqat.com. That's TRANSQAT.com. There, you'll find links to Transqat, the blog, writing projects, speaking engagements, and more. You can also meet the team who thought spelling cat with a Q was a good idea. Follow Transqat on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Leave us a comment on whatever platform you use to stream this podcast. Just remember to be kind. She has enough self-esteem problems already. To reach Claire with a question or a suggestion for an upcoming episode, just use the contact page at the website or email her directly at crmtransqat@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.